and the food information.
Բարև ձեզ, եկավ իմ կյանքում բավականին կարևոր 5 օրերի ամենակարևոր պահը, երբ առաջի անգամ Կորյունը Խաչատրյան ինձ ասեց, որ Միշել Մոսեսյանին Հայաստան գալու մասին է խոսքը, ես բոլոր նամակներում հենց առաջի տողում գրում էի Meet Architecture հանդիպում երիտասարդ ճարտարապետների հետ, հետո ներքևում գնում էին մնացած հանդիպումները, պետական պաշտոնյաների եւ այլն, իմ համար սա ամենակարևոր պահն է, եւ բոլոր հանդիպումները, որ կազմակերպվել են, դրանցում մենք փորձել ենք Միշելի համար բացահայտել մեր իրականությունը լավագույնս, իր լավ ու վատ կողմերով, հանդիպումներ, որոնք միգուցե հակառակ կողմը այդքան էլ չի հասկացել ինչի մասին է խոսում Միշելը, եւ այսօր ես վստահ եմ, այստեղում իրան հասկացողները ամենաշատն են, եւ այսօրվա իրան հասկացողների մեջ ամենակարևորը նրանք են, որ այստեղ նաեւ մարդիկ են, ովքեր պետքա բազմապատկեն ու տարածեն իր գաղափարները։ Ես բավականին հուզված եմ, որ Urban Lab-ին այս կար ժամանակական հատվածում հաջողվեց Միշելի նման մարդու հյուրընկալել Հայաստանում, Միշելի նման մարդու ոչ միայն կապել Հայաստանի հետ, այլև մեզ բոլորիս կապել Միշելի նման մտածող մարդկանց հետ, ու մենք իրար հետ կապվենք։ Ես երկար չեմ խոսա, չնայած կարող եմ երկար անել դա, գիտեք, եւ խոսքը տալով Միշելին, ես կարծում եմ, որ այսօր մենք կստեղծենք այնպիսի մի մթնոլորտ, այնպիսի մի միջավայր, ինչպիսին ինքն է ստեղծում եւ ինքը կներկայացնի դրանք, եւ վստահ եմ, որ այսօր Միշելը մեր մնացած փոքր փոփոխությունների հետ միասին եւս մի հատ փոփոխություն կմտցնի մեր մոտ, բոլորիս իր եւ նաեւ մեր մտածողության մեջ։ Շնորհակալություն։ Michel, stage is yours.
Hello. Thank you, Sarat, for the introduction. I'm sorry I don't understand what he says. I'm sure it was very nice. And I hope you don't mind if I speak in English, which is not my original language anyway. I was born in France, in Paris, and then very early on I kept moving around the world to continue the trip that my grandfather started from Moscow, Michel Mossesian, and when he died in France, I decided to continue his trip. So I went to New York, America, and eventually came back, and then now I've been living in London for the last 12 years with my practice that I started 7 years ago. Today, I will present some of the work, part of the work that I think is important as a foundation to relate, mediate architecture to those that live in space, which is all of us. Anywhere we are on the planet, we share the same values, which is always related to working, living, and playing. Of course, I'm an architect, so my profession is to do architecture. I don't think it's a very difficult qualifier to say, to make a distinction between a building and architecture. The space we're in are usually physically represented by buildings, and some opportunities do engage a dialogue that then we can qualify as architecture. Most of the time it's beyond buildings, and most of the time it's by finding the mediation that ties the people together in dialogue, in community, in sharing, in meeting, and eventually in securing a sense of a culture that can be stronger than the sum of its individuals. You're very aware that the world has been changing tremendously in the last 20 years, not just in Armenia, but everywhere. All the systems that drove the 20th century by diverse sides or different aspects of ideology, some of it was extremely good, but we've seen the collapse of ideology, and in the last 5 years, I think we've seen the collapse of mercantile and economy pure activities. And the lecture I'm going to show you today is it's a lecture that I gave about 2 months ago in London at the V&A. I thought that I didn't want to change because I was coming here. I wanted to test if there'd be receptivity and to test from my first impression, since it's the first time I come to Yerevan, and to see how you react to it. So maybe another time I will present something that is a result of your comments, my impression of the city, of the country, and then some other opportunities that I can see that could help the definition of architecture to culture. This is a very important part of a moment of my life. When I was in Paris, it was like, 30 years ago. I was young, 20, studying architecture, philosophy, and musicology. And there was a moment in time in Paris where a man that you may know, Pierre Boulez, that was exiled from France, that was asked to come when Pompidou Center was built to start a musicology department, which is called the ERCAM, the Phenomenal Institute, to say that classical music has to be continued, and you cannot just listen to the music that was composed 200 or 300 years ago. You need to write the classical or contemporary music of the time that people will remember our time from. So very good momentum. It's amazing how the vector of a person can encourage the change of part of our culture. And so Paris became a very welcoming place to receive different musicians of the world as well. I was in this little church, Romanesque church, in the central Paris, my neighborhood, and was 2 brothers, the Dragar brothers from India, came to give a concert. It's vocal based with a few instruments to assist them. And for the first 20 minutes we were there with them, we could not understand what they were doing. They were just doing sounds like, oh, I cannot do, but nobody knew what was going on. After 20 minutes, they started, we realized, and the whole space started to vibrate. There was like an incredible harmony, synergy between those people, not from the space, coming in and starting to vibrate the space, and we felt like we were lifted up. Amazing. I think architecture is about those things that you don't see, that relates to the space, and creates an incredible collective sensation. So this is an image of sound. This is interesting that in the 20th century, the space between the sounds, you know, the second school of Vienna, the silent became as important as the sound. Same in poetry, where this white space in a page became as important as the words. I'm going to talk a little bit about perception, and I'm going to talk about what are the things that architecture protects that you don't see, but they're part of making you feel somewhere and give a sense of identity. As an architect still in training, I think the space of the architect between the front of the eye and the back of the brain is the space of the architect. It's already an incredible rich dimension that we all have, and most of our education, which is still ongoing, is to educate that part of the brain. And so you tend to have objects that you... Is there a pointer? No. Okay, so you have a series of objects that you have in your mind, but not necessarily objects that you can see, because they may be out there, but you may not be able to register them. So this defines the space of perception, right? There's two spaces, what you can see and what is happening out there around you. It's always happening at the same time. The problem is to define that space of possibility where part of your education, which is repetition and awareness and openness, can bring those things together to create a vision that actually you can communicate. But most of the problem of architects is like what we do when we draw, it's not necessarily understood unless you do a building that you have done before, which is never what I do, and I explain to you later why. The problem is to create an imaginary that is reality before, and as much as an architect still needs to be aware of listening, hearing, feeling, it needs to use the same mechanism to communicate to people, our clients, to see the potential reality that can be proposed. So there's no recipe. Each time is different. Now, next to that came in the last 25 years the information technology revolution, where and we are in a place that magnifies the capacity of what computer can do and how they can affect and change the way we think, but the way we produce. So the first diagram shows just data, which is very important today. And computers allow to process a tremendous amount of data, as you know. And that the question is like, can we tend to, when you go to reality, you tend to extrude, and you have two choices that are given to the world today. You take the bottom one, and you literally build what you can put in a computer. And there's a lot of examples of architects of the world that tend to do objects as magnified sculptures, and thanks to computers. But I don't think the information revolution is about shapes and objects. It's more about vision and capacity to deal with more issues. So my diagram is more about defining a vision, the top one, and not building what others do because of computers. Yeah? All that is because at the center of any key preoccupation in a collective dimension are people. So objects tend to put people outside or inside, but I think what is most important is the space in between, the void, and the capacity to create those places where you can share values in a collective. So where you can feel comfortable alone or in group. And you can look at history, you can look at recent history, how spaces were created, usually to either an ideology, and all those spaces that became of strong power, political power. Usually you realize that you be afraid whether you're alone or in groups. But what are those spaces in a democratic system where you feel actually extremely comfortable alone or in groups? So architecture has a chance to have materiality, but what I'm talking about is how you actually use this materiality, which is made of surfaces and light, how you can, surfaces and material, how you can, with space and light, give that notion of community and shared values. Yeah? So that's an interesting, these are the places in the world where we're involved today. So I say we are a very small practice with a global presence, and my work with my collaborators is to have a local pertinence. This is what I said to everybody, and I've been here for 3 days, and I say, well, isn't like something Armenian in that? Armenia is a small country with global presence and a lot of local pertinence. So I didn't do these slides because I'm talking to you, but I felt like it's an interesting thing that being small and being pertinent locally can generate big, big ideas. Now, and I think this slide is very interesting. This is systematically what I try to engage when I have a new project. 19th century and some of 20th century architects produced with a high respect of their commissioners, kings, statesmen, or church, ask the architect, do me a beautiful, monumental representation of my power, right? So that was the ivory tower notion, and when you're in architecture school, still, I mean, I'm sure today it's different, but you were studying, the Italian Renaissance or the French Renaissance or what happened in history, but you always forgot that this was a commission of a few, not commissioned by the general. So today we know that the commission of production of space is really still commissioned by a few, but it's more like an economical model that I referred earlier that tends to have collapsed in the last 5 years. So money itself is not enough to create value. And I tend to think that the three bubbles that I want to bring together, and I'm not a powerful person, I'm just an architect. I just usually use my knowledge to implement, but I tend to say to my clients, I don't know anything, and unless we can have a shared vision between what represents economy in red, the social dimension, and the political representation, city planners, if you want, in blue, and in green is the environmental knowledge that we have of a place, a condition, well, natural condition, cultural conditions. When those people can meet together and define what I call the black box, then things can start to get into a shared vision. Then I start to draw, but not before, if I can. And this is the complexity of a democratic world. You have a lot of different bubbles, all different interests, all different agendas, all different motivations. It is very difficult to have synergy in a collective. But I think this is the proposal that of this complexity, but we have very powerful tools today. But it always goes back to the fact of you need 2 or 3 people to create the multiple, right? So it's not a statement that tells you what to do and you go alone and come back with a solution. It's a collective series of engagements, and there's conditions for that to happen. But this is what and how a democratic system can produce the best from its people. So you have to define the factors of success, and there's multiple, and these are kind of diagrams that are used typically in business plans when you start to define your vision with what is important. This is an example, it can be different, but the goal is ultimately to compose a perfect circle and not to have a distorted. So you don't do a good facade if you don't do a good floor plate. You don't do you don't do a space that brings a lot of money if the people are unhappy in living or working in that space. So the factors are very important to be defined, and it's not just a client telling you, do me an office building so I can make a lot of money. No, that doesn't work like that. So, I mean, a lot of buildings are produced like that, but it doesn't work usually. So when we have established the factor of success and the ambition that ultimately is a vision, then we start to draw as technicians as architects. So really, I mean, I'm facing you, which is wrong, but if we were all sitting together, you have a different point of views, and you all see the bottle. So I think a project is a bit the same thing. You don't see necessarily, you see basically the shape of the bottle, and you're going to start to describe it. But from anywhere you are, you recognize the same thing. So is a vision that once it's shared, then you start as technicians, as architects, you can start to develop and design. So I have, there's three very important things in my work. And they had to work in synchrony, and it's usually in collaboration with my teams, with engineers, with different people that can add to the making of the vision. So urban articulation is the first one. A building or a form is always happening in a context that had a past, but you know what is incredible too is that the new building you're going to do can influence the future development of other buildings. So it belongs to a cultural background that has been done by others. And it doesn't mean that they were wrong, it just means like they exist, they're there, and you have, in a way, to deal with that. And that's a very important way to engage with an environment. So the second one are the floor plates. Don't want to criticize the incredible, amazing city that Yerevan has, but I've seen a lot of buildings that produced lately that look very beautiful from outside. They have a very good presence to the city scale, but when you walk in a building, they turn to be totally unusable, especially office buildings. And so a floor plate has to be extremely efficient. There's a lot of science in making efficient, functional buildings. Problem we have, because I work in different parts of the world, I'll show you some work after, don't worry. When I work in different parts of the world, people tend to, the clients are very difficult to pay for things that they don't see. So the easiest thing is to get the facade built. So they put the ego to the name on the image, and that goes. But difficult is to pay for things you don't see, which, as simple as mechanical system, elevators, how a building functions really well. So that's engineering. And that's it's like, and a lot of different parts of the world, you see how buildings don't work. So it's like useless effort, right? So that makes a building with unhappy people inside, and a sense of permanence, because it's very hard to unbuild when it's built. So the question is and then very little, the fees, the cost of getting the right people is minimum next to the cost of building a building, and then even worse to put it down. So the last one is environment, which is really working with nature. Why having the mechanical system to do what nature can do if you treat your buildings well? So basically, in other words, is how to get a design that is using less energy because of the orientation, because of the walls. The envelope can be thick, can be thin, depends where you work, in hot climate or cold climate. But there's and usually this is the science of our ancestors. They all knew how to live without electricity. And we tend in the last part of the 20th century to forget that actually there's smart ways to build forms and relying on energy, so we have energy so we can spend. So now we know now in the world that soon, oil and gas will not necessarily be there, and we have to think again how to put that dimension, that knowledge of the ancestor back in the system, so we can design smartly buildings. So those three vectors are to be combined. So that gives you a map that is complex, but feeds to the making of an environment, a built environment. This is, for example, a process under which we go. Once we have the vision defined, we just architecturally, our effort is to come to a solution. But we're not afraid to look at all the influences from the different vectors. And this is very site-specific, this is very cultural specific, and this is very programmatic specific. So that means that every building that we do is automatically different. So I don't stamp, I don't repeat, which was the model of production in the 20th century. International style was to say, you're going to work, live, and travel the same way anywhere in the world, right? Same hotels, same cars, same buildings. And that's not very attractive, is it? Now, I'm going to talk about now through buildings that are currently designed and being built. And this is about sculpting the void, right? So I think this is the place where the notion of inhabited space can happen within the built world. This is, I've been very involved in working in Qatar for Sheikh Mossa, who is like the Queen of Qatar, if you want. She set up an incredible agenda for the country. As you know, the Middle East is very rich today in energy. And she said, why would I build, like Dubai, why would I build high-rises where I can go to New York or Hong Kong and bring my kids to see the originals? Why would I reproduce that like Dubai did, which actually are buildings with no ground and of solitude, lying up next to each other? So how can you, in a culture, in a country that has very little heritage in terms of architecture, they were nomads, and how a woman came in a very male-dominated world to set up a new dimension to define what is Qatari and what would be an environment for the Qatari. She then asked a series of international architects and urban planners to rebuild the center of Qatar, the center of Doha, sorry, and which is literally the opposite of Dubai in a way. It's low-rise, mixed use, and high density. So it's basically reproducing the model of our cities as they were in the 19th century, where you could work, live, and play within a walking distance. So the effort was how, from learning of the few constructions that were done in a very harsh weather, like 6 months of the year, it's like 55 degrees outside and 100% degrees of humidity. That means like you can barely be outside. How, nevertheless, some local sedentary the fishermen could actually live there And we started to look, and Her Highness started to renovate the fishermen villages, which was the lowest class of the society. The nomads, the sheikhs were traveling in the desert, the fishermen were feeding them, and they started to build a real environment. So there's a series of listening. When I went there, I was invited to do a competition, and I had to go there and to see, to feel, and to understand what the proposal could be, which part of the vision was called for from Her Highness, but we had to turn that around. So, okay, so I'm saying more than what I should, but this is one of the buildings that we've done, which is now under construction. But you see here the design process I go under with the 3 vectors, and each time it influences one or the other. So we came up very quickly with a building solution that was presenting a very simple, deep envelope, a very rational office floor plate, and then with something of exception to signifies the identity of the building, because the building initially on the master plan had no vehicle access, but as a corporate possibility, we wanted to give an element of signature, and the actual signature was not a statue, was not a form, but it was a void in the center of the building. So that is the type of space that signifies the identity of the building. And the deep facade is obviously working with the immense amount of light that is in the Middle East, but also the thermomass that cools the building much easier than, but we still need it mechanical, but the achievement of the building is to be LEED gold, which is pretty difficult to get in that part of the world. Okay. Then, typically, the space in between, the void, became a signifier element to the collective. And this is where the physical space is okay. You can say it's beautiful or what. Actually, it doesn't matter. Beauty is not a criteria for me, but how you can then relate more, not just to the inhabitant of the building, but also to what we propose. So I do work with artists, and I think this is where we start the mediation. I think art in a built environment is about mediating from a collective form, a form produced for the collective, to the individual. So art is a mediation. And usually I work very often, I try to convince my client, it's very difficult, to have a curator involved in the design so the art can be embedded in the walls. So basically what it says is like all those panels, which will be glass with cells, forgot the name, they will be activated with an artist, Pierre Huyghe, that does video, and we what it's going to be, but it's going to be something that basically engages more with the people in Qatar. So it's to be seen, but so art becomes a mediation. Okay, then space between buildings, obviously. This is another part of the development where this is residential. I try to bring the buildings as tight as possible together because that creates shades. But then I had to resolve the vis-a-vis of 2 apartment buildings facing each other and start to deviate the views. And then all of a sudden, what I realized, with very little means, you bring the sky to the ground, and then you create a sense of space, and you basically feel like you're in a room already. You're almost inside. Oh. So I'm jumping to London now. This is another building created as an office building that that responds to the mercantile, the commercial reality of the city of London, is to provide big floor plates for office, high standard, but nevertheless I try to find ways to illustrate what I've talked about. So a building has to belong to a context. The context here is like next to Richard Rogers, that's done a very glassy building. And then to articulate the possibility of extension to the north of the site. But I'm not going to go too much in detail there. What I think I wanted to show is like with the process, I started with a brief that was wrongly communicated to me by the client. The client told me, you have to build for 35,000 square meters, and it was wrong, because the city allowed only 25,000 square meters. And when I said it was impossible to the city planners to build 35, they didn't understand what I was talking about, and they didn't know I didn't know. And the client realized that he made a mistake, but actually, by the way I designed with the process, actually we built 35,000 square meters. So there was kind of putting in action the city planners, and corrected the mistake of the client and made the investors extremely happy, but also the city planners very happy with the result of the building, because there was an engagement in the process of thinking the building. So, yeah. So different walls, treatments dealing with the different exposure to the sun. This is the south and the west. This is the east and the north facades, which is more flatter light. And I reduced the amount of glass to 40%, where typically in a city of London, corporate offices want to have 80% of glass. Well, I reduced it to say light travels on walls. So buildings will give you more light because you need a surface to have light, to receive light, right? In true space, it's dark out there. You need a surface to see light. So, and then the northern facade, I developed that with an academic in the University of Glasgow that studies the brain, and he's done, I'm not sure I'm showing an image, yes. This is an image, this is, he's studying the reaction, emotional reaction of the brain, subjected to an image. And this image, if you were walking back and forward, you'll see the same image without knowing when it changes, that goes from smiling to grimming. Okay, different, but you don't see it, you never realize when it changes. So he puts people's brain in a scanner and then reads without knowing that it's changing, the emotional reaction. So I said on the northern facade, which has no sun, right, it's just light, you wanted to make the perception of the building changing from a distance to close. So from far it looks like clouds, and then when you get closer it turns to curtains. Oh, don't have the image, but okay, you have to trust me on that. And that's at the center, as you see the diagram there, there's a continuous void that goes from the lobby, which is a very public and open space, to the atrium, which is the biggest atrium in London, and to a special space on the top that dominates the skyline of London. So. Now I'm back into another part of the world, which is a competition. There was an open competition. If some of you architects probably know this incredible opportunity in Morocco to rebuild the Medina of Fez, which was attractive to do the competition. We won, and now it's under construction. What was attractive was the Medina of Fez, first of all, is like the oldest and the biggest Medina in the Islamic world. And it was to rebuild part of it to secure the activities, the macroeconomy of the Medina, which is craft. And ironically, the whole project is financed by the US Congress. So we thought that it's a World Bank project, basically, and UNESCO World Heritage, and we thought that it's a very small project. We thought it was very, interesting to do the competition, even better to build it. Okay, again, the design process, but I don't want to be too technical. But this is like basically a three-dimensional interpretation of the existing Medina, but linking back with porosity and the public realm, and identifying a different series of different blocks that will be different trades. So there are people working with pottery, with leather, with metal, and they will all have a place to actually keep working, but also showing their work to others. Okay. So these are the trades, and I started to then sculpt, basically literally from reading the way they were building, and bring an artist. Oops. Yeah, these are, I thought it was a great opportunity to bring the local craftsmanship, which is a special way of doing tiling. And tiles, you know, do cool the air, so it's a very beneficial thing for the public, for the space between buildings, courtyards, passages. And I brought this artist, Michel Pinsky. Oops, sorry, going backwards. I brought Michel Pinsky, an artist in London, that would engage with the local crafts and then design basically a series of courtyard with a traditional method, but with something new. So that's part, again, of the mediation, which is part of the navigation for the craftsmen. And in this part of the world, you know, the craftsmen are very talented with their hands, but sometimes, most of the times, they don't know how to read, whether it's Arabic, French, or anything else. So part of, and could be navigation, I mean, a way to find your way around. And this is part of the project. Okay, now it's an interesting project that I was asked with just a few architects, including superstars, very known to do objects like Zaha Hadid, Tom Main, different people that are specialized to do part of the star system. I was very flattered to be, flattered. I was very happy to be one of four to do a very prestigious competition for Saudi Arabia. You know, the Arabs, but it was not those today, invented the zero. And it's like, it was a big jump in the thinking of humanity. There's nothing before the zero, the algebra that the Arabs invented, where there was nothing for nothing. You couldn't qualify anything. And it's interesting to see that the Muslims, but not the ones from the Middle East, the one from Granada in Spain, right? That's where they had all the universities, was a kind of a happy moment of a high history where all Christianity and Islamic and everything, the Jews and all the people of the educated world between the 9th and the 12th century were kind of discovering immense amount of things, like astronomy, astrophysics, algebra, and the zero. So I said, let's do a building where you build nothing, or the building builds the void, or shows the world, the void. The reason for that was also the program. This building was to do a research campus for alternative energy, to study basically other means than oil. And it's ironic to be in Saudi Arabia, where they're the biggest producer of oil in the world. So what I looked, and this is again the black box, to define the vision, that traditionally these people are nomads also, and they used to live either under the concept of tents or grottos, right? So urban articulation, well, it's in the middle of the desert. There was no context, but still, I had to refer to their cultural ways, historically, of living in this part of the world. The second line was about the fact that they wanted to have a campus like Harvard. That was their fantasy. Series of courtyards with different departments, and there was, the dream that they want to buy. And then the third line is to see that in the harsh climate of the desert, the best sustainable form would be a sphere. So, okay. So kind of evolved the process with this notion of reference to their culture, and then trying to tell them that zero is like in nothing you have infinity, that basically if you bring all the courtyards within an envelope which is protective from the environment, you create a greater sense of community and shared knowledge. So different departments will stack up in different floors, and then you have a building that responds very well to the sun and uses less energy. Okay. And the idea was like you don't see the building, you just see the space in between. The reason of that is during the day, the part of this part of the world has the same light east and west. It's like an amazing phenomenon of light. So if you reflect the light that is behind you, it's like seeing through the building, because it's the same intensity as you see the dome above. And so they were interested, but they say, why would I spend so much money for a building that disappears? So they didn't really understand. And they went for Zahadi to do an object that actually doesn't work. It's a roof shaped, and then it's impossible to make it work. So during the day, that was the vision. So the building disappears. And inside, there was a series of vertical squares, public spaces. Okay? Now, this is the other dimension that I started with, is how you create a space that can be where the collective can feel being part of it. And I have no solution for that, but it's just a question. And here are a few thoughts, and then I'm doing a big square in Doha again. I hopefully will illustrate what it means. So that's what I meant by the way architecture, buildings, created the public realm for probably 10 centuries of our history, was always commissioned by state, church, or kings, queens. And this is really about the representation of power, and usually to have more emphasis on the power, you put a big square in front and you call it public space. But it's really self-referential to the idea of authority and power. So there's nothing really wrong with that. This is how European countries have been creating this value system for 10 centuries. But at the 18th century, some of you may know the century of enlightenment, the century of knowledge, where encyclopedia, data, the universal knowledge started to come in place by building libraries, institution of knowledge. There was this architect of the king, at 55 decided this is enough to do architecture of power. Let's see where the real power of humanity can be. And he started to become a visionary architect. He's built very little, but this is like an incredible, powerful space where, for the first time, I think, in history of architecture, you see people drawn in a space. So it's monumental. There was two things he's trying to achieve. Our engineers were driving the architects, engineers were doing the cities, architects were doing the facade. He said, stop that. Let's get the city inside the building. So I'd tell the engineers what to do. Beautiful, man. I think incredible mindset. And then second, there's no facade. This is inside. You are in a public space. And people, are represented. This is a library, all right? But what have we done in the 20th century with this type of vision? Same thing, but spaces not to stay. So the public realm production of the 20th century has been, train station, shopping malls, airports. Same thinking, different application. These are spaces where you're annoyed by people, by people. You come there to consume, buy, time, distance, goods, but you come there not to meet people, and the people are always in your way, right? And I think this is like the mercantilization of our world today that is not to sustain this democratic way of producing space. So spaces where it's basically only you can be there if you have money, first of all, and you have a reason to be there is not to stay. As soon as you get your plane, you're out, your train, or your goods, or your purchase, you go. So there's something wrong with that. So I had, before I go back to Doha, I think I'm going back to Doha. This is a project that I had won in Lisbon on a competition in Portugal. And I was suspicious. The competition was to do 5 architects with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks. And this was the brief, basically to do perimeter blocks with a courtyard and a little square for everybody. So I said, okay, 5 architects, 5 blocks, they're going to give 1 to each. So I said, no, I want all or nothing. So I said, let's put all, the void, and put it in the center and create a new square. And that would be an incredible, more powerful thing to put that part of the development in the city map as a second bigger square in Lisbon. So we did, we won. Okay, I won the competition, great, everything, nobody else. And then I started to question what is this notion of urban room. What is this? How can you do today a big public square if you have no king, no pope, and no statesman? That's a tough question, huh? Because I couldn't find how to do it. But typically today you do a square, a park, with green. And I think we did look at that as the safest solution. But I'm going to pass on that. Okay, I don't have all the images, but you can see on my website the version that we've done. So we're very happy with the building at the end, okay? Residential office, extremely meticulous, elegant, I liked it, as architecture, as background. But the foreground was this big square. And the question was, okay, I don't know how to do a public space today. So I was entertaining long discussions with an art collector, Luis Serpa in Lisbon, that works with contemporary artists and has assembled a very interesting collection as a curator. And we were talking endlessly, and I said, well, maybe an artist can help me. And we had those difficult discussions saying that artists and architects cannot work together, it's impossible, and I agree. I mean, I agreed to it because it usually doesn't happen. Why? He said, well, because you have egos and you're going to be fighting all the time, you're never going to be agreeing. I said, yeah, maybe. But I don't think that, I don't do architecture as an ego. I do defend values. But I said, well, there's definitely something wrong. And that was in 2005. And then I've been thinking again and again. But the proposal we came up with is, as Luis proposed, is to say, okay, let's have Bob Wilson. I don't know if you know Bob Wilson. For those that know the music in New York in the 80s, with John Cage, Philip Glass, Steve Reich, Bob Wilson was a scenographer that has done some of the most beautiful opera work and stage theater design. And then Luis was saying, let's get Bob Wilson. I think he wants to do something permanent in his installation. And I said, great, let's talk to him. He was excited. And I said, how can I meet him and to work on the scheme? He said, no, you get out, you give you a space, and you'll see what happens. And I said, okay, great, that's for the ego, and I leave him to do everything he wants, okay. So, but I like the idea, because that was a way to do, well, that's his work, for example, but how to map and to make a space that will be permanent and be a constant place of representation where the actors will be the citizen, the people of the city. So I thought it was like, you know, good enough to create a space that people feel comfortable to be in, and they will look pretty happy or beautiful, or you know, that would become the objective. But the client had a different taste, and he said, I like statues, I want a statue in the park. So that was a failure. We didn't do anything actually, because Portugal went in a big depression 5 years ago, and the project we got planning, maybe it will happen someday, but it didn't happen this time. So now I go back, and I think it's the last project, but I go back to Doha, where we won the first participation of my practice in Doha was to do the main square for, you know, Her Highness Sheikh Moza. So we're doing all the buildings, but we took the opportunity to develop the ideas of the square. The master plan was designed by EDOL, it's a London practice that technically did a beautiful dance project, but was dreaming about rebuilding more of a city like Rome, or a city that will be comfortable in a tempered weather, where, you know, the seasons are equal, where you can live outside all year. So there was a mistake made by the master planner. But they gave me Her Highness gave me the square to do and the buildings, but I think because of the idea that I sustained, that the jewel box idea of, well, we have a word in French, I don't know, yes, it's a jewel box, the écrin, where the jewel box is the little box where you put what you have most precious. Usually you put your stones or your diamonds or whatever, and it's very precious. And I said, what you have most precious in Qatar are your people. So let's do a room like a box that has 6 faces that will convey a precious moment of celebration for the country. They love that. I think that's why, because we were like 10 competitors, and they selected 3 architects, and they gave me the central part. Where at the time, and it was 5 years ago, I was even, you know, I was okay as a name, but not as big as others like Foster or that were in the competition, but they didn't get anything. And the idea went very well, and so we developed the sequence of the black box logic of trying to capture the spirit of Qatari, and as the vision of Her Highness was asked to draw and realize. And here, okay, so that's the initial image. And then we start to want to correct the mistake from the master planner by saying we have to treat the 6 faces of the box, and where light can draw, actually the ground can be part of a moving scenario, but also cooling. So we're working with the best engineers today. They are in Germany. I don't know if you know Trent Soller and Schleck Bergerman, to do the square, and with artists actually. I may talk about that too, but yeah, sorry, I go back to that. But so the whole idea was to convey a sense of being inside, as what they have. You know, the notion of the majlis, which I think is very common in the Middle East as well, where they don't have public space in the Muslim cultures, only the mosque. And I think as a reference it was not good enough. I don't like that reference, because the mosque is segregative. You have the women and the men on different sides. So I said, I cannot use that. I don't like that values. So I said, but they have one space which is inside, called the majlis, that usually the host are welcoming their guests from outside. So it's the closest to the outside, but it's inside. It's a room where you welcome people and you can drink coffee or tea. So the whole effort of the square that I was given was to say, how can you make an urban room where people will feel very comfortable? So I started to design it as with features of an interior, but this is already the scale of Piazza San Marco, so it's pretty big. And so, like, having said that, and I say, okay, how can we do sofas, chandeliers, fountains, and sittings, and like this formal majlis there on your left, and ask artists to come and develop features that becomes very important in symbolic. And so that's the square now. It started construction 3 months ago, but to correct it, with the cooling system, I was talking about the engineering. Again, this is something you don't see that has so much impact if you engineer properly. The idea is like when it's 55 degrees in the summer, you'll be able to have tea, and it will be 30 degrees. And that's like an incredible series of treatment, which is a pure engineering, very sophisticated, with the shading giving 100%. I mean, there's a lot of layers, where only when you sit there, you'll be 30 degrees. You'll still be 45 degrees in the middle of the square. So that it was an incredible challenge that, I mean, I tell you, it's very tough to go from an idea that has been approved to change it to something else, even though Her Highness loved everything I said, but I had to constantly fight with the people in between that are managing the project, that are ultimately my client, never believing what I said, and they eventually, after 4 years, this part, which is the void, so I was designing the buildings also. You know, what you have to know is that there's office building, Qatari apartments, expat apartments. All the buildings have a different use, and there's a cultural forum. They all have different use. But the idea was to create a membrane and a unity of this public square where it doesn't matter what you do behind the screen, which is made of this onyx. And this is a mock-up. So it's onyx stone, so it's a veil that makes a membrane to separate the inside from the outside. So inside you can work, or you can live, or you can do anything. But on the outside you have the unity of the square that gives a sense of the collective. And I thought it was very subtle, very beautiful, because it's very fragile. This membrane, it's not about imposing, and it's really a proposal of separation, a very slight and gentle separation between two dimensions, the private and the public, as a unity. Oh, sorry. Do you want? Do I have time to present just the last project, or do you want to?
Yes, we have.
You sure?
I think we have that.
Okay, so this is another part. Okay, now I've showed you my involvement in Doha. This is the whole development, and we're the smallest firm. We're only 25 people. We've done all you see there now to stage, all the blue parts, and each time we were giving the best part. The first one was a square, then the office building, then the super block, and then the last one was the highest buildings on the development. And this is what the master planner had done. And you see the whole development of about 150 buildings total. Across the bay of Doha, you have this tower by Jean Nouvel. I know you know Jean Nouvel, and I think he's a great architect. And what he's done is literally doing an object, okay? But it's a self-centered object. It's very phallic. It's very everything you want to see into a tower. But he said this is what it is. A tower is a very sexual representation. So this is an object. And then I love it because you see all the towers around on the West Bay, they all do this, that, you know, they're completely, incredibly, with no justification why they do that. So he said, okay, I stay tight as an object of perfect solitude. Amongst others that think that they're talking, but they're not talking. It's another solitude. You know, people talking with no audience. That's a collection of Dubai, for example. And then in Doha, they have that too. But our project is opposite, and it's my site where the tower is really straight on axis with Jean. So I said, I cannot do the same thing. I'm going to do the opposite, but recognizing that he's done the perfect object of solitude. So that was the project by the master planner, but I changed that, which was difficult. But recognizing, that's where I was trained, you know, in Chicago, trained by SOM. I lived there 5 years, and I was 15 years in America, but I learned how to do perfect machines to work. Beautiful floor plates, pure expression. And unfortunately, international style became that everywhere in the world, you know, like Le Corbusier, like all this, you know, stamping. But that doesn't make sense because a glass building in Doha or anywhere in China doesn't make any sense because its energy is too expensive. But I still want to do the pragmatic, the beautiful floor plates that provides, because they're beautiful, really great place to work. With the highest buildings that Qatar has produced, which is very thick walls. The construction are also obviously brick, muds, and adobe, and there's something very interesting about the imperfection of it. It's very massive and protective. And the fact that here you go from one, oops, sorry, this glass is gone. When you go for one, and you look the imperfection, and you look how beautiful and perfect forms are together, then you engage a collective. Then I say, wow, it's incredible that how imperfect we all are individually, collectively, we can be beautiful. So I started to develop our project on those notions. And looked at the Qatari construction for the fishermen villages. And they are so smart construction. They looked imperfect, yes, but they're actually the best you can do for this part of the world. They provide, you know, common grounds for the community. It's different families. The walls are very thick. And all says about people living there and sharing together the same values. So I start to say from the original thing, okay, let's not do two massive buildings next to each other, but let's make four imperfect buildings dialoguing to each other, like I started here. And rotating and making them not on a grid, and then starting to basically communicate to each other. And creating porosity, so, which is the other thing that object of solitude don't do. They don't care of the ground. Usually you have no access, you don't know where to get in. But here, by articulating the forms with a reason, which is to make the communication between the different parts of the master plan, and starting to basically talk to each other. Well, the idea is like if buildings start to talk to each other, maybe people will talk more when they meet in those spaces. So it's a mimetic relationship with the surrounding environment out of built forms. And what we created by doing this very simple, repetitive, all right, but kind of engaging with the local stone, actually the stones, it could be Armenian stone, huh? You recognize that, I'm sure. I didn't think of that, but it's the colors, the sand colors of the desert too, all the different tonalities of the sand. The space in between we created, it was that the client said, wow, it's amazing what comes out of those towers, an incredible public space. The problem now is like they love that space so much that they decided to have the subway and the international trains to have their main hub below those buildings, and that will be the kind of a terminal point, central point in downtown Doha. So I say, unfortunately, I mean, I'm very happy because I was trying to tell them this is a place to do it, but the problem now is like I have to stop for 4 years for them to dig the ground, to do the subway, to do the train stations, and then I come back to do the buildings. But so I need to keep busy on doing something else until then. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Michel. I spent 3 days, something about 18 hours each day with Michel, but even though it was quite interesting for me. So I have 3 questions to Michel, and after that I will just give a estafette to audience. Actually, in Armenia, there's a habit that the first question we ask is the impression, what impression you got from Yerevan, but I want to keep that for the last one. So first question is, a year ago I was in Young Girl's presentation in Berkeley, and he was trying to categorize or make a theory of public spaces, life between buildings. So the examples that you brought from Doha, so do you think that we can establish some kind of theoretical thinking of approaches or designing or making public spaces nicer, or there is something else, something like spiritual, which you can't put in a theory?
What do you mean by spiritual?
Which you can't put in theory. So maybe that wasn't wrong, that was a little bit wrong definition, but yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, if you look at the history of the landmarks of our culture, I think we've been celebrating architecture and religious spaces in very close synchrony, which meant something in part of history where education was not established, so you had to give enough to the people to believe about being in communities. So I think the purpose of religion has been for many centuries a stabilizing factor where the most beautiful buildings of the collective were the religious places. And so the whole synergy of the societies were to do the best in terms of structure and light, and to bring I mean, the best example, you know, of cathedrals. And then, okay, what happened with that model, which became like a synonym, in my opinion, of kind of a proselytism, where Rome became very rich through the Catholic Church in you know, getting an economy out of spirituality, and which is very mercantile, and you know, done with bankers, the Medici, and it was like an organized crime really set up across the western part of the world. I mean, there were some differences, but so that means like there's a need from the people to have celebrated spaces that are, you feel very comfortable, aspirational, and you find yourself in the infinity of the universe. It's beautiful. Now, museums in the last 30 years started to take exactly all those things from the religious architecture and to bring two concepts together, you know, art as object of consumption and shopping malls, basically, and then start to put all the money you can find to celebrate representation of art. And you know, I loved museums when I was, you know, 30 years ago. I was going across around as a student around Europe. There was never anybody in museums. Today, you go into museums in the Western world, it's like shopping mall. So, where are the spaces then now that we have to celebrate this spiritual dimension that you're talking about? It's got to be in a public domain. It's got to be space in between buildings. It's got to be the set of rules where nobody. I mean, I don't want to say guidelines got to be done where you have to go that high or that far or that long or that. No, but there's a set of paradigm of rules that are always good to have, but subject to interpretation, where the architect or the urban planner or the landscape architect will have to add a dimension that I mentioned, which is dealing with the context, the culture, nature, and the purpose of the building. So what we have to rediscover, because I don't think the mercantile economy or the way we produce space and buildings today, I think it came to an end because I was criticizing a bit Dubai, but it proved itself. I spent a lot of time in Dubai and I was so happy not to do anything there. I was working for SOM before, and I said it will never work. And then at the time, everybody said this is where it's going to work, and this is where we're busy. And I'm so happy it didn't work, because you cannot force things to happen on one model only. Things happen when you mix several models together. I constantly refer to Venice, and I think it's part of the Armenian heritage too. Like the traveling, the mixing, the fact that Venice was built by individuals to the interest of the collective. Venetians were merchants. They were not great thinkers probably, but they were great traders, bringing the Far East and to the West. They were they didn't have any army. They had to buy mercenaries to protect themselves from Napoleons and from Rome. They were people that were just, their mission was to communicate messages and goods. And they built their city as an instrument, which there's not one building not touching another in Venice. There's only one. The taxman is on a one square, 4 faces, but all the other buildings, even the palacios are touching. So every building helped the next building. And it's why Venice became so rich in business. The second example I love to use for having lived also a long time is New York. New York was a very simple set of rules. You have a grid. So on the grid, you can do anything you want if you respect the next block, or you buy the height, the light, and it's very simple rules. And that created an incredible diversity. So the success of New York is the freedom of interpretation of the space, one. Second is the fact that people start to go there because they enjoy being there. Then third, the business happened. So Dubai, going back to Dubai, when you say, okay, I'm going to do the best buildings, the best, the tallest, the biggest, the fattest, the longest, and that's going to make business happen? No. Only people choose, and usually business happens because people enjoy being in a place, and the second thing happens that they start to talk, the third thing happens, they start to make business, or exchange, and that turns into an economy. So I think we need to rediscover those notions that there's no rules, there are principles, that freedom is very important as long as you respect. We say in France that your freedom stops where your neighbor's starts. So there's always a dialogue to be established that you can negotiate, of course. Okay, if I can buy some of your freedom, I will. But it's okay, it's got to be part of the principles. And this then becomes the power of the collective. So, what I want to say is that as much as I love space with light and aspirational space, like the beautiful cathedrals that were produced, I like even more the sense of the discrete that New York and Venice produce as a whole. It's like so incredible. So now, do you want me to respond to your first question?
No, the second one. Today I was watching your interview to Sabri Ghazarian, and I think maybe some of you already watched it. And the title was about making architecture democratic. You didn't say that, the word, but there was in context I have seen that. So can you explain what means for you making architecture democratic, and what's the social role of an architect?
Well, the architect does nothing. I mean, we are not never going to turn things around. Huh? We're just technicians. So we are just vectors, and architecture is the art of putting all those vectors together to start to make sense, to make sense, to give a purpose, and to please, ultimately should be the end users, not necessarily the clients. So now it's a very difficult subject to talk about democracy, but obviously I refer all the time to how to generate a space that is not commissioned by the Pope, the King, and the statesman. And that's the condition of today, and that's the beautiful condition that Armenia is in for the last 20 years. And so now I think something is going to happen in the 21st century where the values or the rules or the system, the ideologies, all that will be kind of part of history, and there's something maybe how do you keep the legacy from the past, which is like fundamental values of living, working, and playing anywhere in the world? They're all the same, so that's amazing. And how to turn that into, I forgot what I started with, but how you can replace the order by the collective decision of collective interest. I don't know how to do that, but I think I'm dedicated to refuse work. Like yesterday, I want to talk about that. Yesterday, with Sarat, we went to see a potential project that will be on the top of the hill, dominating Yerevan, and it looked to me like a Disneyland park, and I went completely mad. And it was a potential client, and I said absolutely. And I started, mad, difficult. To the point where I was about to leave. It was like so incredibly wrong.
Can we say that is social role of architect?
Well, I think now it's a very interesting, I studied philosophy too when I was a student in Paris, and there was, probably know Jacques Derrida. He became very, very popular in America afterwards, but Jacques Derrida questioned this idea of discrimination all his life through philosophy. And he said, you can be offered a chance, but never forget to give resistance. So I think we have to resist to the easy temptation that some people, it's very difficult, because those, obviously the people that want to do that is to help Yerevan, and they really believe that this is going to bring fun for the people, for the kids, this is good, and this is philanthropic, but sometimes they ask the wrong people. And it's very hard to dissociate the incredible generosity of some people that usually, most of the time, talk to the wrong people to help them to do the right thing. So the Agora should be the place where, I think architects should have authority to say, okay, no, but they cannot have power. There's no power. So we have to gain our authority and act with civility, knowledge, and respect. But affirmation should be also part of our commitment.
And the traditional questions, your first impressions of Yerevan?
Well, I didn't know what to expect. Okay, so, it's very rich, so you have to hold on a minute, because I don't want to say silly things. When I came, I'm an Armenian from the diaspora, so I've been very busy. What it means to be an Armenian from the diaspora? Well, I have a name, and this is a branding. Being an Armenian, my name ends with I, not Y, I-A-N. And when I was, I grew up in France, so my busyness was to be French. So, and I think my father also wanted to demonstrate that obviously his name was not French, but he wanted to be French. And then I decided to become American. So I said, and I think it's good to be different people, to be, in the local pertinence, to be useful to the people that are hosting you or you're living with. It's very important. So So the only message I have is, where I'm coming from with big pride, and because it's different too. It's and all right. So that's one. Then I said, well, I know where Armenia is, right? But my people say, oh, I know an Armenian. He's so great. He's fantastic. He's doing this. He's that. Very good people. You can trust them. They're very loyal. They're very competent. And they say, but is there Armenia? They don't know. I mean, the people, the general people, right? I mean, some people, obvious people know, but so Armenia is not on the map. It's not on the map, but I think it's not to say it's wrong. It's maybe there's a specificity today that in last 20 years, is to put Armenia with this incredible diaspora of presence over the world and this beautiful home. So now I'm going to go to my impression of Yerevan. I think having visited a lot of countries in Eastern Europe under the influence of the Soviets, I think Yerevan did the best out of the opportunity that was given. I think the architecture, the setting, the urban framework is phenomenal. You have obviously an incredible asset there, which are the stones that I'm trying to see how we can use them in different parts of the world, but I don't want to take everything from out of Armenia there. I like the stones so much that it's become, part of the place. The scale of the building is extremely successful. I think there's a few area where it's too grand. I mean, there's questions now for what was Stalin Square, now the Republic Square, is leaking all too much. And I don't think there's a vision about how to deal with that yet. But it could be a great opportunity to make it more for the people, not for the cars, not to leak so much, the scale is good. But other than that, when you go in the city, and I've seen it at different time of the day, from first impression to actually great pleasure of being sitting there on the terrace, on the restaurant, on the park, it's very rich. You have already fundamental notion of public realm inscribed in the city, as far as the recent plan of the city from the Soviet times. So it's beautiful, and it's a framework. It's kind of too bad that it was not continued in the surrounding, in the suburbs, but I think there is like a phenomenal, an incredible rich scale urban that puts the people in a beautiful and happy relationship to others. So it's very successful as it is already. And I think you're very and you have a very rich environment to choose for yourself to be happy living, working, and living.
The projects you mostly talked about were again grand civic spaces, financed mostly by super wealthy clients, be they governments or sheikhs or what have you. I think one might argue that one of the accomplishments of the 20th century was in fact allowing for standardization and allowing for the realm. For instance, if you take the residential neighborhoods in most US cities or Soviet realm cities, there's quite a bit of both ideologically opposed systems generated a lot of similar kind of fabric, residential fabric. And there is something to be said for that, in that it allowed a lot of people to have a decent quality living space in terms of material kind of comforts and surroundings and shelter. I noticed throughout the slides you do also have residential work you've done, smaller scale. How do you bring these ideas and match it with this kind of very real demand that people need decent housing and decent places to live? And not only public realm, but also very much the residential neighborhoods and the houses. And how do you merge the two ideas, or maybe there is no conflict? I mean, just if you could just talk a little bit about the massive space that is not the center of the city, the civic center, but where people actually live most of the time.
I understand correctly, standardization created places, denomination, zoning places where one activity and one use was maximized in terms of efficiency at the time, right? And both in America, it created the suburbs, and in Soviet time, it created the projects. Or there's projects in America as well, where the poor will stack up, isolated.
Or the lower middle class.
Yeah, but the American dream, which was started very strong after the war, after the Second War, was to leave the cities and buy your own piece of land and have your house, which was exactly the same as the neighbors, or with little variations, but it was like moving out of the cities. And I think then the consequence of that is like the central cities became ghettos of leftovers. I mean, nobody was living there, nobody was taking care of it, so it became places where there was actually just out of control, like Detroit being the biggest example, for example. Yeah. Well, and today we see that people, I don't know, they see the bill when they have to pay fill up the tank, and they say, well, maybe we should go back to town. Huh? But I think the best model, this is the 20th century anyway, this is only a fraction of our humanity. And the idea that, I mean, when you look at the evolution of mankind under the liberation of oil, has been absolutely phenomenal. We went so fast, so quick, in 1, 2, 3 generations, just because we could drive a car. I don't think we ever seen in the history of mankind, for whatever you name it, 8,000 years, so much evolution in so little time. And now we know that it's unless we master the energy, the fusion energy that the sun generates permanently, we know that we're going to have to change, because we don't have, oil is limited. So what we've seen in the last 100 years, it's just linked to one thing: oil, energy, and mobility. But it's not our nature. I mean, traveling is good. It's been traveling before the invention of the car and the plane, but it's not our function. And then, but I'm puzzled to think that the world has to be organized around taking a plane, taking a train, taking a car to do anything. It's not us. We're not about that. We're about staying together, meeting and living and being able to have several activities. And so it's about, most of cities now, and London kept that beautifully, and that's why London is very popular today in the world. That's why I'm in London. For the last 12 years, I see that London, anywhere you are in London, there's no classification of rich, poor. I mean, there's zones of London that are richer than others, but you can work and live, and the public realm is open to all. There's private public realm too. There's a lot of different classification, but the richness of London, there's many reasons for London being successful, but one of them is to say that where my clients have shown, I could give another lecture actually on another time. When I do residential in London, the negotiation with the client, private, is with the city, and the percentage of social housing that we have to include in our building. So it's not elsewhere, it's in the same place. You have commercial market, and it usually goes from 50% to 70%, and social housing 30 to 50%. And we have to do an architecture that doesn't make a distinction between what is private ownership and social ownership. Okay, there's 2 different cores, there's 2 different entrances, but the architecture expression got to be the same. It's ironic, but I think it's new probably here, or there was only social housing on one place, like most of the world. But in London, they're trying to mix also the wealth of people living, and they're mixing the use. So next to my residential building, I've done an office building also. And all that is coming back together in a more efficient, I think, yeah, we all think, economical, sustainable model.
And the most interesting question for me is, yet I'm just searching a way to learn and to collect the information. So, is there some kind of, or some sort of a certain model or something, a theory, which can bring to the best collection of information to not get it confused in all that like kind of ways or, I don't know, trash, let's say? Because what I mean is, for me, in nowadays or in our system, education system, it seems like maybe it will sound some kind of a rude, but it's like collecting some animals and just study them, like all of them, to climb a tree. Isn't that some kind of a ridiculous, or in our sphere, in architecture?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Is there a model?
A model, like for architect.
To do?
To, like, get the best way to not to get lost in all that technological progress and information.
Yes. Well, I think, all right, you know, I mentioned the black box. I didn't go too far in details, but you've seen systematically the way I'm thinking the project in different phases of the project and how it evolves. And that's based, it's a collaboration model, okay? So there's a model that cannot be reproduced and duplicated. It's just a principle under which you accept to think that is the model. So it's going to produce a different result each time. But the model, for me, this model that I call the black box, which is collaboration process, was designed when I was working in a large practice, even though I was a director and a senior designer, like SOM, you know, where there were between 160 to 400 people. Even had, you know, my talent to say that I'm the best or whatever, but it was always about being the best of something. And it was always about having big projects, but having like 3 or 4 cooks that were either using their hierarchy or using their, you know, way of going and saying what. So it was never about the project. So I said it's about time to invent a process where people leave their ego outside of the room and start to engage with what is the project asking to be. So I developed this methodology in a very high psychological environment where work and performance was based on the one that yells more, stabs the other. So, you know, all the bad things that you can do in collective. It happens. And I think the competitive world is really bad, actually, because it doesn't let people to think what is to be done. So this model came, and it was very successful because I won big projects. So, and there's nobody it was a collective that was trying to be a representative of the thinking. So yes, there's a model. The second reason I've done that when I started my practice 7 years ago was to say that again, the young people or the senior people can participate, and they will participate to the vision at the proper level of contribution, and that's an incredible, powerful model. Because nobody is afraid of doing something they cannot do. They don't do it, but they all know how they can be good because they see what we're trying to do collectively. So the model my model is not about giving orders, never. I know that I distribute, but it's never to one. It's always several people doing specialized in different things, but we all see it happening at the same time. And it's a collective model, yeah.
I'm not an architect, so excuse me if I ask questions that don't have enough background information. But Armenia has had a very rich architecture in the past. I don't know how much you have seen, but from all the churches we have, Datev, Norabank, Gerard, those are all of them jewels that we have. Even Garmaravor is a little jewel that we have in Ashtarak. But it seems that that kind of architecture stopped and there has been no continuity, and it's only church architecture. We have had some architecture in Gumri for residential units, and it is influenced, I guess, it is influenced by the Georgian architecture probably, or maybe, I don't know, Garik can say maybe it's pure Armenian architecture, I don't know. Or maybe Russian, I don't know. But there is it's not only even a gap, there is no continuity, it stopped. And this has been for years now. And I see that you have done some work at Doha where I know the Arabic architecture, I am from Lebanon, trying to find the essence of the architecture and trying to use modern materials and modern environment and trying to recreate that feeling with not copying the old one. Do you think, do you see something in the old Armenian architecture that can continue? Or it had its time and it stopped, and even if we want to go back and create churches, we have to copy those churches, maybe with modern materials, I don't know. But, or can that architecture be used in residential or public spaces?
Yeah, no, I don't know how to answer that.
I know the question is difficult.
No, but it's a very interesting question, because that's what I ask myself. Okay, I tend to preach to my people: study your copy before you come to the class. Okay, so that's why. What do I study about Armenia? Yes, I know the octagonal church, the cupola. I know the city that's been drawn during the Soviet time is beautiful. But I think it's what my first impression was to say. The real first thing to do is always to go back to education. Okay, to the way you can actually study a culture by its migration, movement, and occupation, and try to find the common denominator that characterizes the culture. And it's not about the church. I mean, the church is great. It's a great vector, but it's more about the way people lived and moved. And so one of the things that I think would be interesting, and I'm sure maybe it exists, but Sarah is a PhD, did an incredible study. I wish I can read about part of Armenia was developed at a period of time in age and the beautiful thing would be to have an academic research program to see how whether they were in Iran or Tehran or Syria or Lebanon or Armenia or Moscow, what was the common thing that they were? I mean, I think it's really going to be about the space and how they use the space to deliver their value system. So, I don't think it's wrong for me to say that I don't believe in sacralized space to do things. And as beautiful the Orthodox or the Armenian Church is, I don't think this is about Armenia myself. I didn't get a chance to practice religion, any actually, chosen by my father. To say that ideology and religion has killed more people than has been responsible for killing so many. So decided not to have any religious education. But when I go now, I look at, my wife is Jewish, so I see how the Jews are actually occupying space, and I love this idea that you need 10 Jews to make a synagogue. You don't need anything around. It's just the circle and the union of the people makes the place sacred. And when you look at the work of Louis Kahn, and I'm sure you have a lot of architects here, the notion of celebrating the space before the function and the symbolism of the space is so powerful. I'm sure you've seen, I mean, you've seen the film, and for the movie, My Architect, the son of Louis Cantrain, it's so emotional and so incredible. It's it communicates to a grander public than just architect. But the values that you create space, that anyway, that space can be used for any collective gathering, and doesn't have to be religious. It has the spirituality of humanity, is like incredibly strong, no? So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think there's a study. I wish I had that. I was trying to question. I mean, my questions are not going to stop now, and I'm trying to try to formulate a few things to help to define what Armenian legacy is, whether it's inside or outside. But you cannot just say Armenia is that shape because it's giving in time. But at some point, it was huge, and then Armenians are everywhere. So, and how you make sense out of this? But this is unique. So you cannot do like any other history of people or different history of territories or cultures. It's a unique one, so I think you have to find a unique solution to represent it.
I would like to ask about the formation of public spaces. Usually it is something in between some masses of buildings. And you say, you refer to it as a big room. Why? I understand that there are economical and political causes that don't allow to have it as a series of smaller rooms. Because if you have a big room, then you have the feeling that of control by big power, or something like the square in Yerevan. For example, Czech people dreamt of having a big square, and they didn't have it because they didn't have Stalinistic big fist. Have you tried, or were there any opportunities to create public space as a series of small rooms for intimate connections? How do you think the new technologies like social network changed how understanding of space, public space changed? You said that airplanes are not they are not fitting to our way of living, but they do change everything. And in the age of social networks, I think the understanding of architecture as a big room has changed already, and maybe what we can't do in the computer, maybe what is connected still with our muscles or bodily touching each other.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. I'm going to try to respond to your question, but I think it's a very collective question. It's very much about the phenomena of what's happening on Facebook, and it goes like it demonstrates the power of millions of individuals coming and focusing on the same issues. It's like it's new. It's a very new thing. When I go back to the first part of your question to say the public square, can they be small? Of course, and I think it's ironic that I've been given for something I was asking in a way the questioning, how can we not generate big squares? So I was giving one but I said it's quite impossible for the same reason that you formulated your question. The big space automatically comes with the idea of power, but if you can achieve the most difficult one, then everything else could come naturally. And yes, I think you have to leave the cities as a series of small rooms, of small living rooms, of private rooms, of public rooms, and same the way you organize your house. And at some point, you need a grander scale to share with the larger community of people that you may not know, but it's very pleasant to be amongst. Sometimes it's hard to be recognized or to be known in your home neighborhood. Sometimes you want to be anonymous from others. So that's what the grand spaces can provide. I don't know if I'm answering to you, but it's I think there's a call for we have to stop giving our faith to things that we don't see, like gods and money and all those things. We have to believe more in what we also see directly. So Facebook is interesting. I don't know how it's going to translate into space, but it's not because you can do virtual worlds that you don't need physical reality. Because then, I mean, that's what I was involved in information technology in New York in the 90s. I had my practice in New York then. There was nothing to build, so you can only think. I was trying to invent spaces under the new typology under the influence of the internet. Okay, so I developed a series of concepts of typologies, and then I went pretty far in actually trying to sell the concept to the telecommunication companies. And then those people bought it to kill it because they say, well, anyway, space is dead. We only concern about phones. And it was like, internet was started, it was in 1993. Internet started to be democratized completely. So, and then the next thing that the reaction from the Microsoft and of the world was to go to the telecom companies, that with your phone you'll do anything, you don't need any space, you can work in your car, in your bathroom, in an office, in the street, that was like the objective. So they bought my concept that was about, I'm not going to talk too much, but it was a physical representation of how you can absorb information technology to kill it. Because I say, physical space, we're not interested, it's about mobility. I think it's okay, they succeeded, they became the biggest market in the world, but that creates a lot of schizophrenic behavior as well, or not, I don't know. But I still think values of a space of a representation just to capture light, because there's a sun going on a cycle, it's like just a celebration of every day. And we stop to value that, then we're just a bunch of zombies connected through wireless systems.
Ճարտարապետի բացատրեցի որպես մի տեխնիսիան, բայց ինքն է որպես մասնագետ ունեք նաև փիլիսոփայական կրթություն.
You describe the architect as a technician, but as an architect you also have philosophical education.
Ուրեմն հասկանում ձեր կարծիքով, ասենք ճարտարապետի դերը հասարակության մեջ, որովհետև եթե ուղղակի որպես տեխնիսիան ենք նայում, ուղղակի, չգիտեմ, զուտ գեղեցիկ շեյփեր, ֆորմեր գծելով, ասենք ստանում ենք ինչ-որ Դուբային, ինչ-որ չինական այս գործիքներն են։
As an architect, I would like to know what the role of an architect is. They can create, yes, you said they're a technician, they can create nice things, but I would like to know what the role of an architect is for the public.
Իսկ երկրորդից որպես մասնագետ, որը սովորել եք և եվրոպական դպրոցով, և ամերիկյան դպրոցով, աշխատել եք Ամերիկայում, ունեք ձեր օֆիսը Անգլիայում և international դեմպիկամարվում, ասենք, որպես այսօրվա տնտեսական վիճակով աշխարհում, կոնկրետ ասենք մեր համար, մեր երկրի նման երկրի, որ էկոնոմին էլ ասենք ուժեղ չի, ինչ խորհուրդ տակ, և մասնագետները, որ արդեն աշխատում են, և գալիք սերունդներ, գալիք ճարտարապետներ։
He wants also to know your advice as being an international architect, and also seeing that in Armenia, for example, the economical situation, and us, our architect, what would be your advice to us as far as our work? As an architect and as students, the new generation, what would be your advice to them?
And also, let's be short, and because we are running out of time, so this is the last question. Thanks.
Okay. I take your question as an invitation to come back and to speak about it, because I cannot advise anybody if I don't have a profound understanding of what are the issues. I need another few trips to tell you, to respond about what is the role of the architect in Armenia, and is he just a technician or a philosopher? Obviously, I think, the power of architecture is like the pure concept of the mind to the pure reality of a construction that works, doesn't leak, and functions, protects. So it's the spectrum, the best, most incredible spectrum you can find in any form of expression, and it's permanent. If I go back, I would be very happy to give you advice, but it would be totally arrogant on my side to give you advice now, not knowing you enough. But I will be very happy to, to actually demonstrate through my work nothing that you can reproach I do in the world. So that's my, if I don't do anything wrong, maybe that's a good thing. And I don't want to be a model, but I constantly ask myself those type of things. So that's maybe a start. Whatever you do, think about what you're going to think about it 10 years from now, if it's still right. And actually, I'm going to finish on that. It's philosophy. I had fantastic professors in philosophy, so I did study, and it was about happiness, a whole class. What is happiness? And it's so simple. The definition that this philosopher came with. Happiness is what is good to think, good to live. Two of them are together, you're happy. Because you do a lot of things in your life where it's not very good to think, but it's good to live with, making money or whatever. Well, you do, the opposite. But when you meet those two things, you're happy. So be happy.
Michel, I want to thank you for this incredible talk. I hope this was the last one, and it's not the. This was the first one, that is not the last one.